Welcome to the Mystery of Life. I'm Jo.
And I'm Jonny.
And today we're asking, what happened to Cindy James? I'm assuming you haven't heard of this one because you very rarely have.
Non-true crime ones? No.
No, okay. So a bit of history. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack was born in 1944 in British Columbia. Her mum was a housewife with 6 kids and dad was a retired Air Force colonel. Now, we'll skip forward to when she left school. She went to nursing college, and when she was there, she met a physician called Roy Makepeace. He was 20 years older than her, and they got married after Cindy graduated in 1966. She would have been 22.
So man was like 42.
Yeah, which doesn't sound so bad when you say it like that. When it sounds like you met someone at nursing college and you got married 5 months later, 5 months after she graduated, sorry. It sounds like a bit fishy, but he wasn't her teacher. So they seemed happy, and they were living in Richmond, a Vancouver suburb, and Cindy worked at a treatment centre for children with behavioural and emotional issues, and she seemed happy, like life was good. Skipping forward a bit more, in 1982, Cindy and Roy broke up. So they had a good going, to be fair.
Why did they break up?
Not immediately clear. Apparently they just sort of drifted apart. They didn't share the same interests. Apparently they would row a bit about sailing. She didn't like the water. He really did. Yeah, I think just your usual stuff. And obviously she was very young. You know, I'm speculating a little bit there, but you can kind of see how that might happen.
It's rare that people 20 years apart could have much in common.
I mean, apparently they were happy for a long time, so family and friends were a bit surprised, but it was all very friendly, like it ended nicely, and Cindy seemed happy. Like she got a dog called Heidi, and she got into gardening, and she was happy at work, and this was like the first time in her life that she'd sort of been kind of single as a grown-up. But... So on October 7th, she got her first phone call, and she started getting a number of phone calls like this. It would sometimes start as like a hang-up, and sometimes it would be the whole classic kind of breathing down the phone. We don't get so much of this anymore, do we? I did have that thought. It doesn't feel like we do.
We've moved away from using of the landline, and that used to be the main way because they'd be able to look up random numbers and call.
Yeah. So sometimes they would say that as they grew, as the phone calls sort of increased, they would start whispering creepily, and they'd sort of start to make threats about killing her, and just sort of then sometimes they were a bit sexual and it's a bit gross. But once she closed the blinds and the caller rang back immediately and said, "There's no point in closing the blinds. I already know you're in the living room." So she was obviously a bit alarmed, and I think this was like, she was already, you know, she had already reported the phone calls to the police, but this was like a different, now that someone was looking at her.
Well, yeah, that's the start of a scary film. That is, with the whole
It's very
blinds
classic,
thing.
yeah. Well, over the next 2 weeks, things did get worse. So Cindy told police, and actually it was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who I know you enjoy.
I do enjoy the RCMP.
So Cindy told the police that the person threw a rock through her window, and then she reported that someone broke into her house and slashed her pillow. She actually had tenants living in the basement of her apartment at this point, and they said they heard noises upstairs after they had seen Cindy leave for work. So it was sort of determined that someone had waited for her to leave, broke in, attacked her pillow, and left. I mean, it does sound weird, but like stalkers are weird, if that's what we're assuming this is.
It's quite intimidating, like where you lay your head, they've slashed. It's quite a symbol, isn't it?
Well, she's like getting threatening notes, and they were proper classic, you know, cut out letters. Cut and stick.
Now that is a lost art.
Yeah. And they started out saying things like soon and soon Cindy and things like that. And then at one point someone cut her telephone line. So this is all horrible, but also still quite like, you can understand why police haven't caught anyone yet.
It is horrible, but I'm also appreciating that this criminal's flair for the dramatic.
It's very 80s though, isn't it? So she reported all of this to the police, and they do send a patrol car over a few times, and they sort of keep an eye on her. That they couldn't find anything to suggest who was doing it. And the calls continue. As I say, sometimes they were sort of sexual in nature, sometimes your standard like, "I'll get you, bitch" type thing. Now, Cindy did become quite close to Officer Pat McBride. And I found this a bit odd, because after a month of all this stuff going on, or thereabouts, he moved in with Cindy.
I don't necessarily think it has to be evil or ill intent.
I don't think it was evil, but
it's quite easy for her in her situation to look at a big, strong man and like feel like she needs that protection in her life, and he might just like offering it. Like, I don't,
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to say that he wasn't sort of just trying to help keep her safe or even catch the person that did it. But I just still feel like officers are probably deterred from dating the victims.
yeah, I
So,
imagine he didn't like dance into his like boss and tell him
yeah.
about it.
Apparently, he does comment on this later on when it becomes a bit more relevant, which I will loop back to. But apparently, he did say that they had sort of started to date, and he found himself without an apartment. So it might have even just been a bit of a convenience thing. Like, oh, do you want to stay with me for a bit?
Now, I'm getting a vibe here that maybe it's the policeman doing it to get the girl's attention. There's no evidence; it's just a vibe.
But then they allegedly didn't know each other until she called the police.
Well, yeah, but that's not how stalking works, is it?
Well, so whilst Pat was living there, apparently he suggested to Cindy that he thought it might have been Roy. And Cindy was like, no. They split up on good terms. She had told Ray what was going on, and apparently he had seemed concerned. But then also, whilst Pat was living at the house, he found Roy in an alley outside of Cindy's house with 2 guns. But Roy says he was patrolling the area protecting Cindy, even though she's currently living with a police officer.
It's quite a good lie, or the truth. I can't really argue it.
It's hard to know what to think of that, isn't it?
Like, well, both of these things could be true with
Yeah.
a man in an alleyway.
Yeah.
And you've done. I mean, he's a doctor, right?
Yeah.
It's quite immature for a doctor to do these things.
Love makes you do silly things, no matter what your profession.
Maybe, but I feel this is more nutter territory.
Okay, well, after about a month, Pat actually moved out. They did continue to date for about a year, so that does support the theory that he might have been convenience.
Yeah, it seems like he just crashed there for a bit more than moved in.
And apparently he kept the key to her apartment, and that's why I bring that up, because that may or may not be important.
Well, it depends. Did he keep the key, or did he just have a key?
Well, he had a key. I mean, she
sort
knew
of-
about it.
Like, yeah, like it depends whether he was like, I'm going to keep this for later, or whether he just threw some stuff in a bag and left.
I just guess she never asked for it back. I don't know the full ins and outs of it, but it wasn't like a hidden thing. So apparently neighbours had reported to police a man standing at Cindy's garden gate staring at the property more than once, who they insisted wasn't Roy. So I think that's interesting as well.
Yeah, that's some pretty freaky behaviour, just standing.
You also think that they would recognise if it was Pat too, because he'd been living there for a month. They probably would have asked if it was him. So.
Yeah, I'm guessing they said not Roy because they showed him. Because how the fuck would she know Roy? They know Roy.
Yeah. I'm guessing they showed a picture. Yeah.
So I'm guessing Pat just wasn't on the rate, like wasn't asked about because they.
Maybe, but they did know that he was living there, which is what I found weird because I feel like that's just not allowed. But, you know, I mean,
No,
it's the 80s as well, isn't
I
it?
think it's pretty allowed.
Well, on January 27th, 1983, Cindy's friend Agnes popped round for a visit. Agnes found Cindy in the garage with a black nylon stocking tied around her neck, having been attacked with a sharp object. Cindy reports that there were 2 men, and one inserted a knife into her vagina and threatened to hurt her sister Melanie if she reported the incident. But they report the incident to the police.
They're always gonna. Everyone always does. I don't think anyone that says don't tell the police ever actually believes that they're not going to.
No, so police investigators say they can't confirm either way about sexual assault. They couldn't determine that, and it is difficult to determine that. However, I would have thought a knife would have been a bit more obvious.
Yeah, like it's not like a leather sheath. Like it's not just going to like pop in and out. It's gonna.
No, that's what I mean. I understand.
Let's run an experiment.
No, in sexual assault cases, I get why they're so difficult because it is difficult, especially, you know, if you've been consensual previously, it can be hard to determine exactly what happened. But a knife is going to do some damage. I just feel like there would have been signs of it.
See, are we not starting to think that this lady may be making it up?
Well, police started to think that, so they asked Cindy to do a lie detector test.
Well, we know how we feel about lie detector tests on this show.
But she failed.
Right.
And she says she failed because she recognised one of the people who attacked her. So there was 2 men who attacked her. And she said she recognised one of them. And they said they would attack her family next if she said anything. So she didn't want to give their name.
But she's already told the police.
I know. Well, that's what I thought. I thought, well, then why call the police at all? If you're not going to tell anyone. And then I thought, well, maybe the friend called the police. Like before Cindy could stop her.
Nah.
And also, I thought, why did the attackers show their face unless they planned to kill her? Like, had the friend scared them off, or are they just really bad at murdering? Well, things continued on, the phone calls, etc. And she was, I don't think she was physically attacked again during this next period, but the stalker person never really went away.
She still lives here?
Yeah.
Move.
She did move twice throughout all of this, I will say, but just not yet.
Not yet. What's her breaking point?
I don't know. There were threatening notes, and there would be pictures cut out of magazines of women, and then there'd be like drawings to show that they're being strangled and all sorts of weird shit, like just dark images. And then one morning she found a picture of a corpse of a woman on her car windscreen. Now, apparently, a lot of reports say this was from a medical book called Malpractice, but I couldn't find any official report on this, so there's a bit of a question mark as to where it came from. But it might be relevant since, given that Malpractice was a medical book and her and Roy were both in medicine, then I thought, right, what if that's the only way you could get corpse pictures in 1983? Because you couldn't just pop onto Google.
Probably the first source.
But I just mean I don't know that the fact that it was in a medical book meant anything other than, is that just where you get a picture of a corpse from in 1983? In the summer of 1983, Roy actually pays for Cindy to go and visit her brother, who is stationed in Indonesia. Apparently, Roy has now been trying to win Cindy back, and this gives Cindy a nice break. The stalking does not continue in Indonesia. But as soon as Cindy comes back, the notes reappear. She gets a note that says, "Welcome back," and it starts talking about her death and things like that. In October 1983, so a year since the first incident, Cindy reports waking up to find 3 dead cats hanging by a rope from a tree in her backyard with a note that says, "You're next."
That's a bit weird. What did she do with the cats? Did someone?
Well, she called the police, so I guess they found someone to handle that. That isn't reported on, but it did seem weird to me. And you don't hear of murderers doing this all that much, so I kind of started to look into it because we've never really looked into a stalking case, and I found out that actually quite quickly, with literally just a quick Google, that it's not that weird at all. Apparently, sending dead animals or dead flowers or weird type dark gifts that promote fear is a thing in stalker world.
Okay.
Apparently, it can be for a number of reasons. Provoking fear is the first one. Control and power, showing that they're outside of the law. They can get away with this. And also like a bit of a dark night thing, like turning up and pretending to help. Some even might find it funny to see the person dealing with something so gross, especially if they don't like that person. And murdering animals or enjoying the dead or occult haven't quite like crossed over to murder yet. So it might be like their first kind of steps into that world. There's a whole host of reasons. But yeah, apparently it's not weird in stalking.
Good to know.
Yeah. But in 1983, Cindy wouldn't have had Google. So
well, it is like it's on a global scale. It's common, but it's still fairly uncommon in everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like we know about it, and we do talk about all this kind of dark shit quite a lot. But that's what made me think, like, if we're thinking Cindy is responsible for doing this to herself, I don't think she would have known that. I don't think she would have made that connection. It's a weird thing to do without any reason to do it.
Yeah, but it's also a weird thing to pretend to be a stalker in the first place.
I know, but to go to cat death and hanging from your garden? I mean,
Well,
I suppose she could have gone to the library, but I doubt there was a stalker section.
No. But
Also, it wasn't a crime in 1983.
What, stalking?
Yeah. It's quite a modern crime, actually. I'm sure it happened, but it wasn't a crime. So anyway, after the cat incidents, she hires a private investigator, which I think is quite a smart move. Also a dumb move if you're doing it yourself.
Depends if you hire a good one.
He seems quite good. Ozzy Caban. And he gave her a 2-way radio so they could communicate at all times if she needed him. And that made me realise just how in the pre-mobile phone era we were.
Yeah.
Like before, it'd just be like, just give us a quick text or whatever, or have like Find My Friends switched on. I also thought it must be much harder for a stalker, like today.
I don't know, AirTags have made it pretty damn easy.
Yeah, in that sense. Like it's made them easier to keep track of that person, but also like, you know, ring doorbells. Like you can't just skulk outside of somebody's house anymore. And like you can block numbers and stuff and just literally stop them from calling.
Yeah, but as with all things, scumbags find a way.
Yeah. So on the 30th of January 1984, Ozzy hears a commotion on the radio. Now it's not exactly clear what this commotion was, but he can't get a response from Cindy, so he rushes to her house and he finds her lying unconscious with a black nylon stocking tied around her neck and a knife stabbed through a note and then into her hand that read, "Now you must die, cunt."
Was she dead?
No.
He's terrible at this.
I've written that. My next point was, is he the worst murderer?
What hand was stabbed?
Do you know, I did look for that because I see where you're going with this, but I couldn't find the medical report that told me because, of course, this didn't kill her. So it wasn't sort of as highly publicised as the rest of it. And also, I couldn't find which hand she wrote with, if that makes sense. So even if I had have been able to determine which hand the knife was in, I don't know how much relevance that would have had. But I see where you're going with that.
Well, it's more, not that you can't stab a hand with either, but you're more likely to stab your useless hand if you're the one doing it.
So once she's recovered, she tells Ozzy that she noticed a man coming through the gate, and the next thing she remembers is being hit on the side of the head with something like a piece of wood. And then she remembers being held down onto the floor and a needle going into her arm.
Was there evidence of this?
There was evidence of needle marks.
Right. What about the clonk on the head?
Yes, there was evidence of being hit on the head, but not very hard. But then you wouldn't necessarily need to hit somebody very hard.
Yeah, you would.
Well, police already are suspicious.
Because if I like hit you on the head and not hard enough, all that's going to do is rile you up. Like, think about it. Like you.
But he obviously didn't knock her out, because then she remembers getting hit on the head, then held on the floor, and then the needle.
Yeah, but it needs to daze you. Like if it would. I think too light, and you're going to turn around and defend yourself. You need a really good. And also, it's very difficult to leave quite a light mark when you're hitting someone with a massive bit of wood. Well, even if you do it by accident, you're leaving a mark.
They did find needle marks on Cindy's arm, but they couldn't find any substances in her system.
Did they look for drugs?
I was going to say, I will say, there are substances even today that we do not routinely test for. So I would be interested in knowing exactly what they
she's a nurse with
testing
access.
her for.
She can get any drug.
If we think it's Cindy, are we not more suspicious that there's needle marks and nothing? She didn't inject anything.
Yeah, I'm just saying that in terms of the undetectable stuff, she can get some pretty exotic stuff if she did want to.
So could Roy, by that theory. So,
I don't
know
know the number of attackers are changing. It was 2 before, now we're down to 1.
Yeah. Now, despite the fact they don't find any drugs in her system, and they are already suspicious, having already had the failed lie detector test as well, apparently they also couldn't find any signs of forced entry. And something else I couldn't determine was the door open? You have to assume police checked this, right? Like, just because it wasn't forced entry, have they, was the door unlocked? So you have to assume that the police have done the basics here and determined that there's definitely no sign of forced entry, and that whatever happened, either someone had a key or happened inside that house and they're still there.
We have to assume, but we have to be open to the idea they didn't, because police is generally poop. Yeah.
Now, at this point, they do bring Roy in for questioning, because Cindy now admits that he had been violent during their marriage. Well, I think this does change things a bit for me, because if he was the stalker, then if he was upset because she was the one that broke it off, he might have been the one she recognised when she first failed the lie detector test. It explains why she isn't being killed, because domestic abusers tend not to immediately kill. It's all about sort of control. I mean, no expert, but murdering isn't what's motivating them. So it does sort of make sense that she might not have admitted that at first.
They kind of she accepted him being around to help her.
Yeah. Well, nothing came of questioning Roy, and in July 1984, she was attacked again. Same thing. Black nylon stocking around the neck, needle marks in the arm. Police tap her phone and put a patrol car outside her house in shifts. Nothing happens for months. Now, police at this point, I will say, have spent almost $1 million on this investigation. And it feels like it should have been easier to catch someone, right?
Well, they could be very good at what they're doing.
They must be, because they've gone 2 years now without being caught doing all this petty stuff, and they can't find her. Him. Could be her, yeah. Can't find them. So on December 11th, 1985, so the years are ticking by here, she was attacked again, but this time she was found in a ditch 6 miles from her house. Same thing, though. Black nylon stocking, needle marks. And so in early 1986, Agnes, remember the friend? She decides to move in with her husband, and she stayed with Cindy in hopes that the attacks would stop. I did wonder, why didn't Cindy just go and move in with them? It's a bit of an upheaval for them. Maybe she had a nicer house.
Maybe they didn't want Cindy near their house.
Yeah.
So they could go to their house and it would not be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not judging them. It was a nice thing to do. So things do die down for a little bit, but then one night in April 1986, Cindy runs into their room and says she heard a noise. And Tom, the husband, says, yes, I heard it too. So he goes downstairs to investigate and finds the basement on fire.
Oh, okay.
So Tom tells police that he saw a man standing across the road, which does make sense because if it was arson, apparently arsonists like to watch their work. So, but when Tom approached him, he ran away.
Right.
But police said they thought Cindy had started the fire herself.
I think Cindy started the fire herself.
They said there was no dust or fingerprints outside on the windowsill. Nothing was disturbed, and apparently the fire starter would have had to have come in and out through the basement window. Again, I couldn't determine where we stood on kind of locked doors, but I think we have to assume that police at this stage have at least considered who had access to the house. But they think Cindy's done it.
I think Cindy's done it. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look good for Cindy, does it?
No.
But then what if the police are just fumbling this and someone really is just being a nuisance to her?
It's always a possibility, but does it escalate from here?
Yeah. Well, Cindy's had enough. She's really struggling now. It's been like this for 3 years. She's having a really hard time. She's actually committed to a psychiatric facility, having sort of broken down a bit. She spends 10 weeks there and now writes about wanting to commit suicide and how she plans on doing it. Apparently, therapists there did speculate as to whether or not she staged her attacks during psychotic breaks. And I think we need to be careful about tying her mental state in with the possibility she was doing this herself here, because it's possible either way. Yes, it could have been her doing it during psychotic breaks that she may or may not remember, but also what's happened to her could have been the reason she's become suicidal. Because what if all of this really is a case of stalking, domestic violence or similar?
Yeah, you can't just because she's got a mental health problem, we can't be like, that solves everything.
So she's released from this facility and she's fired from her job. I mean, the 80s were a different time, weren't they? She moves and she changes her name from Makepeace, which was obviously her married name, to James. So she's now Cindy James. She continues to see a therapist and things are on the up. She finds a new job. She seems okay. There's no reports of police to police for a year until in October 1988, Cindy was found unconscious with the black nylon stocking around her neck and needle marks. This is going to sound a bit harsh, but I did wonder if anyone looked at how many black stockings she owned. Like, could we not keep an eye on her buying habits?
Or just see if she's got an uneven amount.
Anyway, this time she points the blame entirely at Roy. And he continues to deny it. And apparently he has now been able to prove that he was out of the country for at least one of these attacks. So it does cast a shadow of doubt over him doing it. So we're sort of back to square one, it would seem. Then, on May 25th, 1989, Cindy disappears. She vanishes. The day she disappeared, she had deposited her check from her new nursing job. And then she bought groceries. She goes to the salon. She buys a gift for her friend's son's birthday. And then she's gone. Her family report her missing and her car soon turns up at the shopping mall with the groceries, her wallet and the present that she'd bought all still inside the car. They also found blood on the driver's side door. Nothing for 2 weeks. On June 8th, 1989, by a city employee, Cindy's body was found. It was in the backyard of an abandoned house. And to quote the worker, he said, her face was completely black. It had been punched in. A cord was wrapped around one ankle and a wrist. The worker said that from what he could see, it was not a suicide. There was just no way you could put yourself in that position. Now, she was basically hogtied. I actually have a picture, which I'm about to show you, but for everyone else, I will put it on the blog because it's not as grim as it sounds. You can't see her face and she is clothed. Okay, so
that's pretty grim.
It's a difficult position to get yourself into, right?
In this, I don't think this instance is self-inflicted. It would be extraordinarily difficult to do all of those things to yourself.
Police decide almost immediately that it was a suicide. And it gets reported that this was clear cut, but it was not really true, and I'll come to that in a second. They confirmed that there was a lethal dose of morphine injected into Cindy, 10 times the normal dose, along with diazepam and flurazepam. But if she injected herself, where's the needle?
And how'd she get into the position that she's in?
Yeah, exactly. She would have had a very small window to ditch the needle, get to location, start tying. And they reckon at first they said that she would have had 15 minutes from when she injected to death. And apparently a knot specialist, I don't know how you get that job title, but apparently a knot specialist determined that Cindy could have tied herself into that position in 3 minutes. I find this to be bullshit, to be perfectly honest.
I don't think it's bullshit. I think
a not specialist could do it, but if you're like high on morphine, and suicidal,
maybe she paid someone to inject her.
Well, her family point out all of these things, that it's weird and difficult to believe, and they don't believe she could have done this. They also wonder, why kill yourself in such a complicated fashion?
We do have the possibility of psychotic break.
But still, would you go to this much?
I don't know what I'd do.
Deception?
I don't know what you do on a psychotic break or why you're doing it.
Well, apparently they also theorised that the morphine could have been taken orally, which is how they reached 15 minutes, but they said they couldn't determine this. Apparently, the medical professionals were baffled, which is not something you hear every day. Not when it comes to drugs and stuff. That's quite well managed.
What were they baffled about? Whether it was
oral or so. But they also apparently later during the inquest, which I'm just about to come to, they did say they couldn't accurately determine how long, if at all, she would have been able to function. So the father says that the police didn't even consider homicide. They just said suicide, and that was that. The family argue that threats happened when people were around too. So if you remember, obviously she lived with Pat. And she had Agnes. Pat later testified that he did pick up phone calls for Cindy. So at the very least, someone else has got to be involved.
Yeah.
Now, when all this was said and done, Cindy had filed almost 100 police reports from everything from harassment to home invasion, arson and violent attacks. So there was an inquest and there was over 80 witnesses. It went on for months. It was only supposed to last 2 weeks.
That's gonna.
Yeah. And they gave evidence to a panel of 5 jurors. And forensic psychologist Anthony Marcus suggested she was living her own nightmare, that this was her doing, and that she might have even suffered bouts of amnesia after doing the staging. So it could have felt very real. She might not have realised that it was her.
Yeah.
Apparently in the Edmonton Journal, an article covering the inquest at the time, they said police did initially investigate it as a homicide. I don't think they determined it as suicide all that quickly.
Yeah, there is an element of this story being told to us. And it being from the viewpoint of the person writing it. So if they have a negative view on police, they instantly...
Yeah. Well, in the inquest, we also heard that apparently at one stage, Cindy was put under hypnosis, where she thought she recalled her ex-husband Roy chopping up a woman. Now, this is the danger of hypnosis, isn't it? To me, I just feel like you're just going to imagine stuff that didn't happen. How do you know that really happened? And if someone's ill to the point where she's having psychotic breaks, do you really put them in a state of hypnosis?
Well, again, it was the 80s. They did what they like.
They thought that might have fed into her fear or delusion that it was Roy.
Yeah, totally.
Roy obviously denies this and said that she even called him once to say, I remember you chopping up this woman, and he had no idea what she was talking about. Apparently, though, Roy does admit he only slapped her twice.
Okay, different time.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds bad when you say it like that.
What were they together from?
About 20 years. 1966 to 1982.
Yeah, 60s and 70s. There was an element of you could get away with that.
It also came out that when Cindy was at college, she had written to her family who were in France. They'd been relocated there because of her dad and his job. She wrote to them, and at one point she announced she was engaged to an intern, but then she said that he had cancer and he died, and that's when she met Roy. And no one ever met him. So it was sort of speculated in this inquest, was that the beginning of her fantasy? I mean, maybe we're being a bit too harsh, but this is how it went in the inquest. They did agree that they couldn't rule out an unknown assailant. But this forensic psychologist person thought that she might have had a version of dissociative identity disorder, which you may know as multiple personality disorder, which it's not anymore. But in this instance, they theorised that Cindy may have been stuck between day-to-day and neurosis, and that it might have even stemmed from some sort of abuse. Ultimately, they couldn't decide, and they didn't know whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident. In the end, after months of an inquest, they ruled it death by unknown event. Imagine that. Imagine if you're the family. You don't even get, even if you disagree with the result, they're just like, we don't know. Unknown event.
I'm surprised that's even an option on the form.
I know. But I will say, police get a really hard time for this. And I think it was entirely possible that she was telling the truth. Stalking wasn't a crime, and police, did investigate.
There isn't much they can do, given that this person, if there was a stalker, they pulled it off without leaving one shred of evidence.
Now, I'm going to play for you one of the first phone calls. And I've waited until now to play it because I feel like it's going to swing you one way or the other. Where are you right now in what might have happened here?
I'm leaning more towards dissociation than anything else.
Okay, right. Let's. This is the first, or one of the first calls before any physical attacks. Okay, so they're saying, Cindy, dead meat soon. Do you want to hear it again now that you know what they've said?
No.
Okay. What are your thoughts?
That sounded awfully like a woman.
I'm going to play it again, actually, for our audience, because you might not want to hear it again, but they might. Let me just listen to this one more time. I've got to be honest, I did think that does sound like a woman trying to sound like a man.
I didn't even think it sounded like a woman trying to sound like a man. It just sounded like a woman with a sore throat.
No, but like they were doing that thing where it's like, oh, I can't do it. I'm going to sound ridiculous doing this, but they were like, Jonny.
Yeah, no.
I'm trying to sound menacing,
yeah,
but you can still tell it's me.
That doesn't help her case.
It doesn't, does it? And I wish it did, because I'm not like 100% convinced. You know, like there's some crimes we do and we're like sure either way or whatever. Or I'm not 100% here.
There's always the other option as well.
What's the other option?
That she did make up all the stalking stuff and then got murdered by someone completely unrelated to it whatsoever. Just is a murder victim.
Or a mixture of that.
What do you mean?
Well, some people theorise that maybe the phone calls were real. She liked on some level the attention she got and carried it on herself.
Yeah, that is another way.
Again, this is not to say that she necessarily even remembers doing this, like the psychologist.
But in this case, I do think that given the complete lack of evidence and the laughable quality of that thing, I'm comfortable saying that most of it she made up. I do question why if she was going to murder herself, it wouldn't involve some form of hosiery, because that had been part of every attack, was that she had a stocking wrapped around her neck.
Yeah, it is weird. I mean, a few final thoughts here, just things that other people have put forward as well. And my own thoughts as well is that this person sounds like messy and unorganised, which, I mean, I suppose they may well be. But like you said, why is there like one and then there's two? How many people are involved here? The whole thing just seems, to get away with a crime like this, you would have had to have been at least a bit organised.
I think there's definitely a portion of this that was in her head. And unfortunately, that is going to be the real stumbling block to get into the truth, because you don't know how much of it is in her head and how much is real. So it could be anywhere along the point. She could have stopped lying. And things carried on.
Yeah.
Or she may have started lying later. Or so you can never really feel like you're onto something, because you just don't know which bit, because she definitely was making some of this up.
Well, I don't say this often, but I saw something sensible on Reddit. Some people were asking why police didn't just surveil her and not tell her.
That is a good point.
It is a good point, isn't it? Because then they would have been able to see that it was her and like drawn a line under the matter. Because they were never really sure enough to say, we know it's you, that's that.
Yeah, but these are the same people that if they did surveil her, would be like, that's against her personal freedom.
Reddit's a difficult place for true crime, but sometimes they have good ideas.
No, it would be a good idea. But I suppose they probably themselves had concern about her freedom. Or it was a policeman doing it, they know about it, and they're covering it up.
Yeah.
There's no evidence. I think she was just a little bit of a nutter.
Yeah, I mean, I think there might be some truth in there somewhere for me.
There's always a kernel of truth somewhere, but
I do feel horrible for her family, because it's one thing to have someone in your family murdered or kill themselves and you don't agree with that. But to have it declared death by unknown event just screams just worse to me. So I do really, really feel for them on that. And I hope that, if it was a murderer, maybe one day they'll find him. But otherwise, you're not going to get any peace, because she can't come back and tell you what happened. I don't know that we'll ever know with this one.
Yeah, I can't feel confident in making any assumption as to what happened at any point. But I've got a very strong feeling that some of it's made up, if not all.
Yeah. I think that her mental state was involved in some of this. I just don't know whether I'm willing to say how much, because I just really don't know.
I mean, her mental state could have made her a vulnerable person.
Yeah.
And murderers love preying on vulnerable people. So like I said, the murder may be real.
Yeah.
And everything else is made up. And she just happens to be someone that made up a load of stuff about being stalked and then got murdered by someone that wasn't a stalker.
Yeah. At the very least, the inquest was very thorough.
This is true.
So
something would have come out in the inquest.
Yeah. I'm not always on the police's side, and I'm still not 100% here, especially because they really didn't take like stalking events and stuff as seriously. But they did spend a lot of money. They did try and protect her. I'm not wholly against what they've done here. But I think this might be one of the true mysteries in true crime that we've ever really covered, because we really don't know. We really haven't even got strong opinions on it.
No, this is a proper mystery.
Yeah. Now, before we go, I want to introduce this. Let's close off that topic, okay? And now I want to bring you what I am hoping will be a new weekly feature.
Mystery news.
Yes, it's mystery news. So this is a little feature that I wanted to add at the end of every week. And it's either just going to be a little update from a previous case we've covered, or a little piece of news that we've spotted that I want to have a quick chat about, just literally a few minutes, but doesn't warrant its own episode. This week, I want to talk about the tiny radioactive capsule that went missing. Did you see this?
Yeah.
I just think it's a really good example of how sometimes people in really important jobs just fuck it up. I'll just give you a bit of history for anyone that has missed it. This started a couple of weeks ago at the end of January. Newspapers reported that a radioactive capsule was missing and people were looking for it. And it really was tiny. It was described as pea-sized, like kind of garden pea-sized. And the public were being warned to stay away from it if they see it. It looked like a stone. It wasn't green. It wasn't like you wouldn't know it was.
Radioactive things don't glow green.
No, I know. But I mean, it was kind of frightening in that sense. Apparently, the casing contains small quantities of radioactive caesium-137, which could cause serious illness if touched. And this was in Western Australia. It was being transported on a truck between a mine north of Newman and northeastern parts of Perth. They don't know exactly when it went missing. And for context, they lost it somewhere in the distance of the entirety of the UK. It was 870 miles.
That's one long road.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're tiny in comparison. The distance from Land's End to John O'Groats in the UK, so end to end, is 837 miles. That's how far they had to look for this little tiny pea. Well, authorities said that vibrations during transit caused the bolts. It was bolted into this little, container. And it allowed the capsule to fall through the gap in the casing and then through a hole in the truck somewhere.
I'm guessing they've checked, but it could just be inside the truck.
The good news is they found it. So, but imagine they had so many people looking for it, just up and down this road.
Well, you got to. It's highly.
I know, it's mad.
A kid could find it and eat it, or an animal could, or.
That's what they were worried about. They said that our concern is that someone will pick it up, not knowing what it is. They may think it was something interesting and keep it, or keep it in their room, or give it to someone. But they did say as well that it cannot be weaponized, but it could cause radiation burns and have other long-term risks like cancer. They said it emits a reasonable amount of radiation. Do we really believe they've found this?
Mm-hmm.
870 miles is a long way to look, isn't it? That brings us mystery news this week. Mystery news will be back next week. I just thought it was fun to share with you a story that I thought shows us that no matter what your job, we are all human. We all fuck it up sometimes. But they have found the pea. So people of Australia, you can sleep again. You can find our blog on our website at mysteryoflifepodcast.co.uk. You can follow us on Instagram at the Mystery of Life Pod, and we'll be back next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.